Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Oscar Johnson, and I'm the head of U.S. Commercial Client Coverage for Treasury and Payment Solutions here at BMO. I want to begin by saying we have an incredible client representation on the webinar today from across a variety of industries and locations. And it goes to show you that it doesn't matter what your industry is, where you're located, or the size of your organization. Protecting yourself from cyber criminals is critical. Even prior to COVID, we were having daily conversations with clients about fraud protections. But with the onset of COVID, we found ourselves having more conversations about fraud than ever before. It's important to point out, though, fraud during a time of change is not uncommon. With business models rapidly changing, entire workforces moving remote, employees were eager to jump in and help. And what that creates is opportunity. And that's resulted in total fraud losses of more than $120 million, according to the Federal Trade Commission as of August 26th. That's why we invited you here today. Since we have a lot to cover, I'm going to walk you through the agenda quickly, and we'll get started. We're joined by Brett Johnson, who's going to share how he got the nickname, the original Internet Godfather, by the U.S. Secret Service, and give us a firsthand account of how cybercrime communities operate and how they infiltrate organizations. Next, Marilyn Abate from BMO's Financial Crimes Unit will walk through the most common ways these fraudsters execute frauds. Then, Kelly Richmond Pope, forensic accounting professor at DePaul University, will discuss how these fraudsters cash out and share a recent example with you. And lastly, we took questions in advance of the session. I'm going to use those questions after the presentations to further guide our discussion. So let's get started. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, thank you so much. Guess what? That is my United States Most Wanted picture. Yeah, I was in Las Vegas, Nevada the night before, stolen $160,000 out of ATMs, signed on to Carter's Market the next morning. There's my name, U.S. Most Wanted, beside it. There are things in life known as aha moments. This was more of an type moment. So I did what any normal person would do. I loaded up and I went to Disney World. Yeah, I really went to Disney World. Lasted about 6 weeks. The Secret Service, they came and got me, arrested me, sent me to prison. Then I escaped from prison. Well, I prefer not to think of it as escape. I think of it as the institution could no longer benefit me, so I decided to release myself on my own recognizance. That got me even more time. So the question is who's talking to you today? Well, the United States Secret Service called me, slide, the original Internet Godfather. Now, what did it take to get a title like that? In my case, it took 39 felonies, a place on the United States Most Wanted list, an escape from prison, and I built the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor to today's darknet and darknet markets. It laid the foundation for the way modern cybercrime channels still operate today. Those 39 felonies, well, they had to do with refining modern financial cybercrime as we now know it. Account takeovers, phishing, ransomware, business email compromise, synthetic identity fraud, tax return identity theft. I mean, I can keep on going. The problem is that I was involved in most of it. For all that stuff, I'm that guy. Of course, I went to prison, rightfully so. The thing is I had enough people who cared about me, who gave me a chance, who took me in under their wing, that I was able to turn my life around. Today I work to prevent attacks from people like I used to be. I'm able to work with the FBI today. I work with Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 500. I work with financial institutions. I work with consumer groups like AARP. I speak across the planet. I live a completely blessed life. I truly do. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I'm damn grateful for it. And I want to thank everyone out there for taking the opportunity to listen to me today. I promise you that I will do everything in my power to protect you and your organization from the type of person that I used to be. That being said, if we can get to the next slide, if you want to find out how cybercrime actually operates, this is what's called the cybercrime triangle. So it has the criminal, it has the organizations, and it has the necessities of cybercrime. So let's start there. There are three necessities to committing successful cybercrime. Those three necessities are gathering the data, committing the crime, and then cashing out. The problem is that a single criminal, one guy, cannot do all three things. One guy is good at one thing, sometimes two. Very rarely can he do all three. And that is why we see the overall world of the dark web forums, marketplaces, the surface web groups, things like that. They allow that one specific criminal who is not good in all three things to network with other criminals who are good in the areas where he or she is not. The criminal, him or herself, what has to be inherent in that criminal to commit the crime? Three things: the willingness, the ego, and the knowledge. Now, willingness, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is what is that criminal willing to do? Take an identity thief, for example. That identity thief may be more than willing to steal the identity of a millennial, milk out their bank accounts, set up new accounts in their name, create multiple accounts to cash out, to launder money, commit new crimes by putting their data on a fake driver's license and committing crimes using their name. But is that same criminal willing to take over the account of a senior citizen, take over their Social Security account and steal that money? Maybe not. Maybe their moral compass has not skewed enough, and they sit there and they realize, hey, this $800 a month this person gets, that's the only money they get. If I steal that, how are they going to eat? Maybe they're not willing to do that. So willingness. Ego plays a huge part, because that criminal has to believe that he or she can defeat a $1 billion company or a $1 billion security company. It's kind of like David versus Goliath. You have to believe that. Your ego has to be big enough that you say, I can do it and I can get by with it. Finally, though, knowledge. You can have the biggest ego in the world. You can be willing to commit whatever crime you want to commit. But if you don't have the knowledge to commit the crime, you are completely useless. And that, again, is why you see that overall world of the dark web and surface web groups, the forums, the marketplaces. They train that criminal on how to commit that specific crime. They contain the knowledge needed to commit that crime. And again, it boils down to three things, the three necessities: gathering the data. So going out, stealing the PII, stealing the bank account logins, the credit card information, those types of things, gathering data, committing the crime. What do you do once the data is committed or is stolen? Do you set up new accounts? Do you engage in synthetic identity fraud? Do you do account takeovers with bank accounts or credit cards? So committing the crime, and then finally cashing out. Because if you can't put cash in pocket at the end of the day, you are completely useless. So let's talk, and let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about gathering the data. Slide after that. So there are a few ways that criminals gather data. It's phishing, business email compromise, telephone fraud, SIM swapping, and then deep fakes. So what do I mean by phishing? Well, guess what? Phishing is the number one attack vector on the planet. 92% of every single attack out there begins with a phishing attack. 92%. So, and what is a phishing? That's that email that gets sent out that looks like it comes from Bank of America or maybe Hulu or whatever, that gets your credentials. It asks you to update your account, that tells you there's a security problem out there. So phishing. Business email compromise. Business email compromise is a $7 million a day business. Notice I didn't say crime, because crime these days is a business. $7 million a day is what's stolen with business email compromise. It is one of the most successful crimes being committed right now. What is it? It's basically someone spoofs an email, or they have a like email and they send it out to your accounting office or a CEO or something like that, that's asking you to update banking information, to send wire transfers out, something like that. All right. Telephone fraud. What do I mean by telephone fraud? It can be either phishing. So what I mean by phishing is those SMS texts that come through saying you've got an account problem, or saying, did you place an order, or saying that, you've got a package coming. So SMS text fraud, it can be like that, or it can be an actual person on the other end of the line, or a robocall that comes through saying, hey, we need you to update your information, or hey, I'm with the Social Security Administration, or me calling into a bank and saying, hey, my name is Brian Johnson, and I need to update my account information. Can you help me with that? And I convince the customer service employee of how of doing that for me, taking over those types of accounts. SIM swapping and port outs. Recently, we saw that Twitter was hacked. And when it was hacked, people used a variety of phishing attacks and SIM swaps to handle that attack. And the result was they took over the accounts of Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Barack Obama, and 43 other accounts to try to manipulate people into sending Bitcoin to one specific address. And they were somewhat successful. They got arrested. But they did engage with SIM swap. So what is a SIM swap or a port out? Basically what that is the phone that you have in your pocket, that phone, I have that shut down and I have the number transferred to a prepaid cell phone that I have in my pocket. The way that I do that is basically a phishing attack to begin with. I fish out the person that I am wanting to compromise their phone. I get their secure password, their PIN number, whatever, and then I call Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, what have you, and I have that phone number switched, shut down, and then transferred to a device that I have. It's very, very effective. Finally, deepfakes, and we don't see a lot of deepfakes right now, but deepfakes are that process of, I'm sure you guys have seen it. You can go to YouTube and you can put in Jim Carrey, The Shining, and it has Jim Carrey's face and actions and everything in Jack Nicholson's place in The Shining. It's outstanding because I didn't really realize until I saw that The Shining was a comedy. But it's outstanding. But the thing is, it's not just that. What I can do is I can take my mannerisms and I can implant. I can put them. An algorithm is used so that I look exactly like your CEO or a customer, and I can send a video saying, "Hey, I need you to wire $4 million out to this other company." So it's that process of spoofing a person's face where you cannot tell the difference, or a person's voice where you cannot tell the difference, and then requesting something to happen, a transfer, an account update, something like that. Let's go to the next slide. Again, I mentioned this before. I'm going to mention it again. 92% of every single breach out there begins with a phishing attack. Why? Why would I potentially spend years trying to fight my way, to brute force my way through an industrial-proof firewall when the only thing I need to do is send a phishing email to someone behind that firewall? I get the exact same access, and it's a lot quicker, a lot easier. If you look at spear phishing is about 86% successful. So I know I'm going to get access at that point. Now, why is that? Well, a lot of people say it's because there is no patch for human stupidity. And with that, we'll hand it over to Marilyn.
Thanks, Brett. Now that the criminals have infiltrated your network in some way, they need to execute the crime. Slide, you'll see how the crime is executed. So there are a number of ways where the criminals can take the money out. There's electronic payments fraud, where the criminals can access the organization system account, modify payment instructions, impersonate a user with sign-in authority, or by intercepting and changing payment instructions. We've also seen check fraud. Check fraud is a way for the criminals to take money out of the company. It's very commonplace. Businesses send billions of dollars in payments by check, and the process is manual. That's why checks remain a favorite target for fraudsters. We've also seen invoice fraud, where a fraudster poses as a vendor or business partner and convinces a company to wire funds to a typically offshore account as payment for services that were never rendered. Another common form of invoice fraud is employee fraud, where the employee, typically in finance or bookkeeping, creates a false vendor and then enters a number of entries and pay that fake vendor in order to gain benefit. These are just the common ways that what we're seeing. If we go to the next slide, we'll go through the common types of electronic payments fraud. Online payment request. A fraudster disables the account security features, enters a new email account or phone number, and then submits an electronic payment request. Service-assisted payment request. This happens when a fraudster contacts a customer service agent with a payment request. Commercial account takeover. We have seen these where fraudsters create a new user with authority to approve electronic payment requests. Intra-company impersonation. Some cases, fraudsters impersonate a person who has signing authority to request payment for fraudulent instructions. Interception. Instructions for electronic transfer payments are intercepted and changed by the fraudster to include fraudulent information. Credit card fraud. Fraudsters don't need your actual physical card to commit this fraud. Most of the time, all they need is the card number and expiration date to make unauthorized purchases through the phone or web. The next slide will show you how to spot electronic payments fraud and help protect your organization. So apply extra scrutiny to international payment requests. For these ones, we recommend you implement a callback procedure to ensure that the funds are going to the right place. Ensure payments match invoice amounts. Do not accept payments that are higher than the amount that you are charging. Verify email and fax requests for electronic payments. Use a phone number that is already on file or you know to be genuine. Ensure that your customer service team asks authentication questions to verify the identity of the caller to avoid service-assisted payment requests. Segregate the duties of payment creation and approval. Segregation of duties is a key control to prevent employee fraud. One person who enters the payment details should be different from the person approving the payments release. Set transaction limits at both the user and account level to limit and mitigate the fraud. Create payment templates. When possible, these can be used as a single authorized user initiating the payment and an approver. Run credit card reports that show detailed transaction information in order for you to monitor the spend on the cards. And use file validation services from your bank. So there are a number of ways that you can protect your organization from electronic payments fraud. Use reporting to monitor patterns of payments and look for any changes in dates, frequency, or amounts. Monitor payments in real time for suspicious activities such as ACH alerts. Implement 3DS Secure to verify the identity of the customer making the payment. Set up limits by card or cardholder, by number of transactions per day, week, month, by state, country, by withdrawal amount and frequency. Ensure cards can only be used for appropriate goods and services that are authorized by the company, and consider blocking sensitive merchant category codes such as alcoholic beverages and jewelry. Educate your employees on card safety. Remind them to never share their card information unless they verify the request is legitimate. And don't share information via email unless the message is encrypted. Keep cards and PIN numbers safe. Don't share them or write them down. Make PIN numbers difficult to guess. Ensure that when conducting online transactions, the website starts with HTTPS and there's a small lock icon in the browser address bar. Exit websites securely using the sign out feature and make sure you remember to clear your browser cache. Use chip and PIN cards whenever possible. The encrypted microchip is difficult to counterfeit and no signatures can be forged. All BMO commercial cards use chip and PIN technology. Use the card verification number scheme, the CVS code or the CVV code when requested. And consider additional fraud mitigation services that are offered by the bank. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you detailed common types of check fraud. Counterfeit checks are when they're using a computer, scanner, or printer to duplicate your check. Altered checks are checks that are intercepted and they're real checks that are issued, but they're intercepted and they usually change information such as the payee name or the amount on the check. Forged checks are stolen checks and then where they forge a signature. They'll often replicate a legitimate signature that they may have found online, so it looks very real. Kiting is also a form of check fraud and it's used to obtain unauthorized credit by writing multiple checks between multiple accounts to make it look like there's funds when there's really insufficient funds. If we go to the next slide, I'll walk you through some things of how you can spot check fraud. The check numbers are inconsistent. Sometimes the check numbers is in a different font, the numbers or digits are off, or they're in a different location, and the sequence doesn't match. Spelling errors, particularly in the company name, that could be an indicator of a fraud. The bank routing transit number in the microline doesn't match the bank's address. Use fraud prevention services from your bank to help detect check fraud. Your bank will often offer positive pay, payee positive pay, and reverse positive pay. So you can protect your organization from check fraud in order with checks per account. Use a continuous set of serial numbers when reordering checks. Use checks with security features such as magnetic ink, watermarks, and chemically reactive paper. Keep your check stock in a secure location and immediately destroy any unused checks from closed accounts. When you're issuing checks, we recommend you issue and reconcile with care. Don't leave any blank space on the recipient and amount lines. Make sure the person who issues the check is not the same person who reconciles your accounts. Have different accounts for different functions for reconciliation to be easier. And reconcile your statements as soon as you receive them. Put strict audit procedures in place for check printing and signing. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about invoice fraud, where I previously mentioned where a fraudster can impersonate a supplier and request that you send funds that are sometimes to an offshore account, or you may have an employee who's involved in committing the invoice fraud, setting up fake vendors and paying themselves. So here are a number of ways how you can spot invoice fraud. Check the invoice. Is the invoice seem legitimate or unusual? Compare the invoice with other documents that you already have on file. Try to employ a three-way matching. If you can match the invoice to the purchase order or receipt of goods, then you're much less likely to pay a fraudulent invoice. And verbal approvals. For invoices that have new or updated banking information, request a verbal approval or confirmation from a number that you've used in the past or are used to doing business with. Don't use the number on the invoice, as that if the invoice is fraudulent, the number is also fraudulent. How to protect your organization. Again, reconcile. Match each payment with a purchase order and receipt of goods. Implement dual controls. Separate the duties of payment, creation, and approval. So one person enters the payment details and another person approves the payment's release. Employ automation to the extent you can. Automate the AP department gives you tools you need to effectively implement the tips that we've discussed for preventing fraud. It's probably the single most important step you can take to stop invoice fraud. Now I'm going to hand the webinar over to Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Marilyn. Let's get started with talking about cashing out. Now, as you heard in my intro, I am an accounting professor at DePaul University in Chicago, and I love using stories as a way to teach and convey information. And I think stories are a very powerful way to help us understand the decision-making process of people. And so one day I was doing some searching and came across this fascinating story that I want to share with you. But it's also very spot on to what we're talking about today, because it involves business. It involves a business, a couple businesses, but the whole area of business email compromise. So let's go to the next slide and you will find this fascinating. So I'm looking online in July, and this story came up on my phone. Instagram star flaunted lavish lifestyle, but was actually conspiring to launder hundreds of millions of dollars, U.S. prosecutors say. And so, of course, when you see this picture, you want to keep reading. You want to click and keep reading. And so started reading about this. And so this gentleman was a resident of Dubai and flaunted his lifestyle on Instagram. So you would see him posing in very high-end stores, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, expensive cars. And so he went by the name of Hush Puppy on Instagram. He had 2.7 million followers on Instagram. So he was this influencer. So he claims that he made money because he was paid to showcase these luxury brands, because that's what influencers do. Because remember, we know now being an influencer is a real job these days. So anyhow, I went on, I read the story, and I couldn't believe it. So I click on the Department of Justice link about the story. And I couldn't believe that somebody would just live so openly like this if they were really laundering money. And so before we get into the story, I want you to understand that, and Brett mentioned this, is how detrimental business email compromise actually is. Now, he told you a daily figure, but when you think about in 2019 alone, $1.7 billion were lost by companies and individuals being victimized due to business email compromise. So this is a big, big important area. So going back to this case. So Hush Puppy, let's call him Hush Puppy for the sake of our time together. So what did he do? Well, Hush Puppy, we'll go to the next slide. And this is just another picture of him. I already told you he was a social media influencer, lived in United Arab Emirates, was a resident there. We're gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so here's some of the things that he was doing. So part of his business email compromise scheme, he defrauded a client of a New York-based law firm out of almost $1 million in 2019. Okay, and how did he do it? BEC. Now, what else did he do? How he did it is, the criminal complaint from the FBI says that he tricked a paralegal at the law firm into wiring the money meant for a real estate refinance into an account that Abbas and his co-conspirators were using. So what you notice here is who he targeted, a paralegal. And so this is why training is so important, and why the conversation that we were having between compliance versus something efficient is really important, because this paralegal might not have ever had training on what a criminal is actually going to ask him what they're going to do. So ended up, this paralegal wired the money, and he and the co-conspirator were waiting for it. He had several accounts he set up in Mexico, Romania, and other parts of Europe. And just giving some more detail about that, he was trying to launder $4.7 million in a cyber heist from several foreign financial institutions. And this happened in February of 2019. And so this money was sent to bank accounts around the world. And the reason why cyber crime is so dangerous is because it spans all territories. So international boundaries makes it seem like people are above the law, and it can spread so fast that it's hard to prevent, which is why training and awareness is so important. The last thing he did, in one daring effort, as you see on the slide, he planned a cyber rob of an English Premier Soccer League. Now, who does that? And that was supposed to be around $124 million. Now, his legal team is saying that he was an influencer and that's why he got all his money, but the Department of Justice thinks otherwise. Now, another reason why I'm so interested in this case is at one point he was here in Chicago. And so, I'm trying to find him. I'm trying to ask people, like, if he's still here, I got to get an interview. So who knows, I might snag an interview with him. But he was here in Chicago, and he was claiming that he wanted to make bail and stay with a girlfriend that lived in Homewood, Illinois. Now, records show that he doesn't have a girlfriend. He hasn't had any interaction with the girlfriend. And so the case was filed in Los Angeles, but the investigation is being done here in Chicago. So he is probably now in Los Angeles. But if I can find this guy, I really will. But it's really interesting because it speaks to why we're having this session and the importance of understanding business email compromise and how detrimental it can be. And this is something that I want to remind you of, and that is cybercrime will cost the world in excess of $6 trillion annually by 2021. And this figure is up from $3 trillion in 2015. So this is something that we have to pay attention to. Now, I hope I haven't scared you away, and I hope that you are taking this information and using it, and will make your teams and your organization stronger. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Oscar.
Thank you, Kelly. Now, as I mentioned when we began, we received a number of questions in advance of today's session. I'm going to take the remainder of our time to ask our speakers to answer your questions. Our first question is from Marilyn. Marilyn, what is the most successful form of fraud that companies should be aware of right now?
The most successful form of fraud that we have been seeing right now is the business email compromise. It is impacting a large number of our customers. We've also seen a number of coronavirus phishing attempts and electronic payments. We've also seen invoice fraud and check fraud, but those are the most significant ones that we've been seeing right now.
Thank you. Brett, what's the latest suggested approach for resolving ransomware intrusions? And once there has been a confirmed ransomed attack, how does an organization know whether they are still hiding in the system?
Well, the number one thing would be not to become a victim of ransomware, but understand that sometimes that happens. Understand that ransomware happens mainly because of phishing attacks. So it's important to make sure that your employees are properly trained. In the event that a ransomware attack does happen, isolate the machines. Do you have backups? Do you have at least 3 backups? Make sure you have those, that you have those even off-site is an excellent idea. Inform the employees, notify the security IT team, take a picture of the ransomware, a page there, so that you can have that as evidence when you notify the authorities, because that needs to be done. All these things together. Now, how do you tell if the attacker is still in there? That becomes extremely difficult because some of these attackers are extremely skilled. Some of the ransomware that's installed is extremely technical. So it becomes very difficult to do that. But if you've got proper backups, if you've informed the authorities, if you've got proper security awareness training, if you've got cyber insurance in place, if you've got all these things working together, at that point, you're not going to become a victim, because there is nothing worse than paying that ransom.
Kelly, is there something specific that our commercial clients should look out for when assessing for fraud?
Oscar, I think that's a really great question. And I think that a lot boils down to the way we train our employees to look out and spot red flags. And I think that we really have to make sure that the training is effective and that it's impactful, so that when there is a phishing attempt or when there is some type of email compromise, we know to look for that. So it's sort of like the hairs on the back of your neck raise when you see something that seems fishy. So I think what's really important is we have to really train our employees to spot this, because they are our first line of defense. And training can't be taken lightly. It can't be a check the box, we've done it. We really have to make sure that it's working, because that's our only way we can fight this.
Okay. Marilyn, I have a really interesting question that came in, and I welcome your response here. An organization received a couple penny deposits from a company they've not heard of. At the same time, from the same company and for the same amount, they received a notification that an auto debit needed an approval decision and an option to add the company to the approved list for auto debits. The transaction was declined. Was this an attempt to gain access to their accounts?
Yes. So in this case, we have seen this before, and the fraudster is testing. They're testing the validity of the accounts, and they're trying to get access to the account to complete ACH fraud. So in those cases, if you ever see money coming into the account that you're not familiar with or you're not aware of, you should report it to the bank immediately. And you should not sign the approved list for the auto debits.
Okay, thank you. Brett, what can be done from a technology perspective to prevent attacks?
Excellent question. So what can be done? First, to understand that, yes, there is a technology perspective to do this. There are things you can do. There are, do you have proper backups? Are you scanning all ingoing and outgoing emails for any type of malware that might be on there? Do you have proper firewall security in place? Do you have secure passwords? Are they changing passwords? Are they random passwords? Are you using password managers or tokens, things like that? So understand that, but also understand that that I cannot overstate enough the need for something like cyber insurance, because it's not a question of if we'll be hit, it's when someone is going to be hit, because it's coming. It's coming. So cyber insurance is important. Backups are important, both off-site, cloud-based, and internal systems. So, but understand that an internal system, it can become compromised as well. I like the idea of cloud-based backups, but also I like the idea of having your information where you can physically attend to it as well. So I like the idea of both of those. It's important. Kelly mentioned it, and I'm going to mention it as well. Proper security awareness training. That cannot be overstated, but make sure that security awareness training is taking place in the same manner that a criminal will attack you. There's a difference between training for compliance and training for effectiveness. Compliance is needed, absolutely, but also train the way a criminal will attack you.
Okay. So I'd like to ask the three of you the same question. Are there any other tactics organizations should consider to help mitigate fraud? I'll start with you, Kelly.
Well, I think that Brett's past response of the training is just spot on and super important. And the compliance versus the effectiveness analogy is really interesting, because it's a new way of thinking. Because to think about training employees how an attack will happen, or thinking of the mind of the criminal, training them that way, is a completely different process than compliance. And so it's a counterintuitive way for us to think about training, but it's so important. And I think that is our key of revamping the way that we protect or arm our employees. So I just wanted to add to what Brett said, because I think that was a very important distinction, because I think far too often organizations are focused on compliance, especially in highly regulated fields, but that's not what you need to combat fraud. You have to think like a fraudster.
Thank you. Brett?
You know, I said it just a second ago. It's proper training. Let me give you an example. At one point, I was working for a Fortune 50 company. When I was working for that company, we sent out a phishing simulation email. The email simply said, hey, we've added 2 more days of vacation time to the calendar. All right. It didn't mention what those 2 days were. Instead, it had a little PDF at the bottom of the email that said calendar. And the question was, how many people will click on it? The answer was everyone. So here's what happens, though. The people who clicked on that email, they got so upset, they raised so much drama within the company, that the company sent out this email that said, hey, we apologize. We will never launch another campaign like this again. That is the exact wrong thing to do, because that is exactly how a criminal will attack you. Train for effectiveness. Sure, be compliant. That's important. But train for the attack that's coming. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. There's been several statements by really recognized cybersecurity people that have said that, hey, there are 2 types of companies in the world. There are the companies that have been hit, and there are the companies that are going to be hit again. If you think you've not been hit, you're probably just not noticing it yet. So be prepared.
Marilyn?
What we've noticed is with the rise in remote workplaces, it's very important to set up proper controls and processes that mitigate this risk. For example, your vendor may have had to go remote, and you're not, you can't call them in the office to validate information. Suggest you set up a video call, get home numbers and cell phone numbers, but get it from the actual person. Video calls are the best, so that you know you're actually talking to your vendor.
Brett, you have a really interesting background, and we understand that you work with the FBI to help them to think like a criminal. Can you elaborate on some good trainings or organizations that help with training, and some of the things that you would provide, or how you provide guidance to our clients?
Sure. So let's look at that for a second. Okay. So I mentioned phishing emails a moment ago, and I gave that example of sending out a phishing email that says, "Hey, we've added 2 more days of vacation time." So that's one of these techniques that a criminal uses to attack you. This idea of how do you get someone to click on that email. So that's the type of thing I'm talking about there. Sending emails like that. Understand that a phishing email, especially if you're looking at spear phishing, is over 80% successful. People are going to click on it. But that's not the only type of attack vector. Let's think of a thumb drive. All right. What happens if I just come to your place of business, your company, and I drop a thumb drive in the parking lot? Is someone going to pick it up? I'll tell you they will. They will. They're going to plug it in the computer. Here's what studies have found. Here's one of the techniques that I use. So they plug it in the computer. They look at the files that are on it. Does one of the files say something about salaries? If it does, are they going to click on it? They are. They are. So you can do techniques like that. Think about the phone, because the phone is really one of the #1 vectors of attack. It is one of the most successful vectors of attack. Not only that, but experienced criminals. See, a newbie criminal doesn't pick up a phone. A newbie criminal is scared to death to pick up the phone. He thinks people are going to record his voice or reach out through the phone and grab him and arrest him. It takes an experienced criminal to do that. So what I like to do with phone training is actually train the customer service associate on how to identify that you've got a fraudster on the other end of the line. And the way you do that is you set a baseline with the call. You start talking to the fraudster about, little bitty things. How are you doing today? What's going on? How's the weather there? Blah, blah, blah. And you set this baseline on how they're responding, on how that tone, how the flow of the conversation is going. So then later on in the call, you start asking more important things. Well, what are you using the money for? Well, why are you changing the phone number on the account? Well, what's going on with this order that you're placing? That way you can tell, based on the baseline that you set at the beginning of the call, if something is wrong later on. Do they speed up? Are they getting louder? Are they hesitant on things that they shouldn't be? Are the answers not quite what they should be? Things like that. So this is what I'm talking about when I say train for effectiveness. Train the way the employee or the criminal will attack. That's what counts. Think of credit card fraud. All right. Think of account takeover. So what I'm saying is, instead of being compliant, and compliant is important, but if you're running a bank, you want your employees to understand what an account takeover looks like. So what I do is I will actually work with a bank and have staged account takeovers. I'll call in, and the employee knows nothing about it, but I'll call in and actually do an account takeover that's already planned with the bank, with the management of the bank that's hired me to come in. So think of things like that. It's important to be effective, because again, it is not if you're going to be hit, it's when you're going to be hit. And the chances are you've already been hit.
Mm-hmm. This was excellent. Thank you, Brett, Marilyn, and Kelly, for joining us today. As we wrap up the session today, let's take a few moments and go over 8 steps to help you prevent fraud. For organizations, reevaluate and update your processes. With all the changes that have taken place since March, ensure what you put in place is right for your working conditions and adjust. Go digital. Digital payment options available through online banking for business are more secure, and they're simpler to transact and reconcile. And they're also quicker to get information you need, including checks and balances. In addition, you can add templates and dual approvers. Don't forget to also download online banking for business on your mobile device with biometric authentication software, so you and your team are secure and encrypted on the go. If you can't go digital, use your bank's tools. Enroll in BMO's account reconciliation and positive pay, as they can help you monitor your accounts and review items on a timely basis. And also with positive pay, your team reviews and approves checks before they clear. Educate your people. Training and education is one of the strongest tools in protecting businesses against potential fraud. You should develop strong security habits with employees. For example, share this webinar with your teams so they know what to watch out for regarding suspicious activity, and ensure they're aware of the prevention tactics for individuals I'm about to cover. For individuals, update your software. Always update mobile banking apps with new versions and when they become available, because they typically have security patches that help protect information and devices from the latest malware. Limit social media fraudsters to do their research. They pursue social media, company websites, and often target employees and accounting departments. Limit the amount of personal information you share. Password protect. Try not to reuse your passwords. Use different passwords for every website, account, and device. Antivirus. Make sure you have the most recent version of your antivirus software on all of your devices. On the next slide, you'll see how to report fraud to BMO. Report suspicious activity to us immediately. Either call the help desk, or for suspicious emails and websites, email them to phishing@bmo.com. And in the chance that you fall victim to fraud, do a follow-up evaluation to see what happened. Then figure out how to address those holes in your systems or processes for the future. Please remember that BMO is here to support you and your organization. I encourage you to reach out. If you haven't already connected about your fraud mitigation processes, we can help. Protecting our clients and your organizations is a top priority for us. So we hope you found this session valuable. Larry Zelvin, the head of our financial crimes unit, often says, stop, think, and then connect. That is incredibly important to remember today more than ever. Nothing is so urgent that a process should be circumvented. A recording of today's session will be emailed to you in the coming days. Please share that with your colleagues. And if you have any follow-up questions, reach out to your BMO representative. With that, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your attention. Take care.